Welcome to the 10th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. Today I'll talk about the role of India in the world and how this impacts their position on Palestine. To understand India's position in Palestine, we need to look into how anti-colonialism in India took shape, how India's role is in the multipolar world, how to understand Hindutva and Islamophobia, and then the conclusion on India and Palestine. India has a long history of struggle against British colonialism. India was colonized initially not by a state, England, but by a private company, the East India Company. They owned and administered India, at that time India, Pakistan, Bengal, and they had a private army. They levied taxes, they occupied, plundered, robbed India of its resources, and that was done by a board of the company. Many people think that colonialism is a state enterprise, but it was in a few cases a private enterprise. And with every act of oppression, there's an act of resistance. So in India, there were always resistance against British colonialism, and the first war of independence of 1857, the British saw them as terrorists, and that was the first large-scale nationwide uprising against British colonialism. And then in the 20th century, we all know about the struggle for independence based on Gandhi's strategy of building a mass movement on the principle of non-violence, which led to the independence of India. To understand India, it's also important to understand the role that socialism played in India. The socialist movement in India was impacted by the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Communist Party of India, CPI, was formed in 1925 and it split in 1964 in two branches, the CPI and the CPI Marxist. And the CPI is in state government in Kerala. But then general socialism had a very attraction to the leaders of the Indian National Congress. Gandhi, Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose had a socialist profile. And the Indian National Congress profile was a secular party. And in the constitution, in the preamble of the Constitution of India, it describes itself as a socialist, secular, democratic republic. And it used some form of central planning for its economy. Then there is another branch of anti-colonialism in India. You see it in the Islamic movement. Syed Ahmad Khan, an Indian Muslim scholar working for the East India Company, but had a high influence at that time in the 19th century, propagated adaptation to British colonialism. And Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who had also followers in India in the Muslim community, was a pan-Islamist. I talked about him in episode 4 on Iran. And he was vehemently anti-colonialist. So there's a trend, anti-colonialist trend in Islam, but also in Hinduism, because Gandhi based his philosophy on Hinduism, and that was anti-colonialist. Yet also other religious groups like the Arya Samaj, who were anti-colonialist from a religious perspective. Now, religion plays an important role in Indian history, and the Muslim-Hindu divide led to this traumatic experience, the partitioning of India in Pakistan and India, at the independence, and that determined for decades the relationship between India and Muslim within the Indian subcontinent, but also beyond. And the biggest problem is the problem of the formerly princely states of Jammu and Kashmir, where Muslim majority, especially in Kashmir, is ruled by India, and India labels that opposition as Muslim terrorists. So these are elements that determine the psyche of part of the Indian political class. Now, for a long time, the Indian National Congress dominated the political scene in India. From 1947 until 1969, except for two short periods, the Indian National Congress was in government, and it gave critique to the corruption and mismanagement. But with the decline of socialism after the fall of the Soviet Union, you get in all the globes, all the parts of the planets, you get a rise of critical narrative of Western domination linked to ancient narratives of philosophy. You have that in China, where Jinping refers to Confucius. You have it in Africa, where they look for African knowledge as a counter to Western knowledge production. You see it in Russia with the concept of Eurasianism, with Alexander Dugin as one of the leading philosophers. You see it in Bolivia, where in Latin America, where concepts of Pachamama, Mother Earth, and Buen Vivir, a good life, is embedded in ancient old philosophies. And in India, you see a similar thing, where Hindutva is the expression of Indian civilization for parts of the Indian intellectuals. What is important to know that the economic changes that were instituted with the reforms of 1991 was very fundamental and had a very big impact. Till 1991, central planning was leading, but not as strict as the Soviet Union, where the state owned companies. But in India, the state controlled many economic activities, not by the ownership of the means of production, but by rules and regulation. And in 1991, the state ended its monopoly of the public sectors, water and energy, etc., opened India for foreign investors and allowed them to invest in the Indian markets. The Indian private sector emerged with a new breed of entrepreneurs to take advantage of these opportunities. And interesting enough, basically what you see is that more than 10 years after China began its reform, India began its reform, and in China it led to the lifting out of poverty of 800 million in a very short time, and a similar process you see in India, where 415 people have been lifted out of poverty between 2005 and 2021. India has to catch up in terms of the strength of economy with China. China has an economy strong of 27 trillion international dollars, and India has 10 trillion dollars, international dollars. So India is catching up, but this has a long way to go. And India has taken a leading role in shaping a multipolar world. In 1955, it was one of the co-organizers of the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, in the city of Bandung, where people from outside the Western Hemisphere developed an alternative to Western domination. In 2001, it was a co-founder of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that deals with security issues. And in 2009, it was the co-founder of BRICS, together with Russia, China, South Africa, and Brazil. Yet, if you look at, they still have a cooperation with US, but they also have a cooperation with Russia. So internationally, uh, India is developing a position that is independent of the US, aligns with the BRICS country, but is also somehow independent of BRICS, and that has everything to do with India-China relations. There are long-running border disputes between India and China. China's support for Pakistan is problematic for India. And recently, the US president and Modi tried to develop an alternative for the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. It's called India Middle East East Europe Corridor, IMEC. India, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Arab Emirates, Israel, mind you, Israel is part of this, France, Germany, Italy, and the US. They want to build rail and shipping routes that connects Western Asia, they call it Middle East, with India, just like the Belt and Road Initiative connects China with the rest of the world. It's not taking off yet. It's an idea which was launched recently. But for the US and Israel, this is part of the normalization of relations with Israel, this project. Now, India's stance on Palestine has everything to do with the Hindutva ideology, which is the ideology of a paramilitary organization called RSS and the ruling part of India, BJP. Its founder of Hindutva, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, defines Hindutva. He says Hindutva embraces all the departments of thought and activity of the whole being of our Hindu race. For him, Hinduism is not a religion. Hinduism is a race. And what does it leave other non-Hinduist people from India? And he says, Mohammedan or Christian countrymen who had originally been forcibly converted to a non-Hindu religion and who consequently have inherited, along with Hindus, a common fatherland and a greater part of the wealth of a common culture, language, law, customs, folklore, and history, are not and cannot be recognized as Hindus. For though Hindustan to them is fatherland as to any other Hindu, yet it is not to them a holy land too. Their holy land is far off in Arabia or Palestine. So about Muslims he's saying, and even about Christians who have the origin in Palestine, he's saying you're not part of India because the essence of India is a Hindu race, not even Hindu religion, not an idea, but of the people with the Hindu background. So if they are not part, you're talking about 100 million or some Muslims in India, where does it leave India? And Hindutva presents itself as an anti-colonial narrative because they have very fundamental critique of Western colonialism and Western civilization. And even one of their proponents, intellectual proponents, J. Sai Deepak, wants to turn India into a decolonial philosophy. In his book, India That is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilization, Constitution, he says Bharat's indigenous identity must be traced to a period before the Islamic invasion, Middle Eastern colonialism. He's talking about Western colonialism, but now he takes decoloniality to argue that it was Middle Eastern colonialism, the Islamic invasions. So it must be traced to the period before the Islamic invasion and European colonization, and the Hindu religion was a glue that bound this civilization. So they don't see the Indian civilization as a multi-religious, multicultural civilization. They see it as one that is based particularly on Hinduism. Now, before the rise of the BJP, the relation between India and Palestine was based on anti-colonialism. In 1974, India became the first non-Arab state to recognize the PLO as the sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. In 1988, India became one of the first countries to recognize the state of Palestine. And that changed with the BGP because then what guided the BDP was this Hindutva philosophy. And their reaction to October 7 is telling. Prime Minister Modi wrote in his Twitter account, deeply shocked by the news of terrorist attack in Israel. Our thoughts and prayers are with the innocent victims and their family. We stand in solidarity with Israel at this difficult hour. And his external minister, Jaishankar, who is very anti-colonial in many of his videos, you will see how he is critical of the West and the Western colonialism and the narrative. There's a large following. He says what happened on October 7th is a big act of terrorism. We all find terrorism unacceptable and we have to stand up on terrorism. So he doesn't regard Israel as a terrorist state that occupies people's land and kill people and imprison them. He sees the struggle against that oppression as terrorism and violence is used. So nothing about 75 years of occupation and oppression. And how to move forward with the future? Well, they take the two-state solution formally as the goal, knowing that it goes nowhere. So Hindutva view on Islam, the Kashmir question where they link Islam with terrorism, and led to a few of normalization of relations with Israel and Arab countries, in which India plays a role through this Middle East Europe corridor. And with this approach, basically India has placed itself on the wrong side of history when it loses sight of the historical injustice that the Israeli occupation is. So next episode, I will talk about the role of Saudi Arabia in Palestine and in Western Asia. I'll go into its role in the multipolar world, its relations with US and Israel, and with Iran, and finally with Palestine. In the book, I deal with India in the two paragraphs, one on Indian economics and the other on the Indian narrative of civilization. As usual, you can download this PowerPoint from my website, sandevhira.com. And if you want to support this channel, subscribe to it, share it with your friends, family, and colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe, get involved in discussions group with the DTM theory, and make a donation if you can at sandevhira.com. So thank you very much for attending this session and hope to see you tomorrow.